We hope you are enjoying our series from the works of Rudolf Steiner, where we have one book that we've published, and then we do two videos with Douglas and John discussing the book. I'm very excited with where we're headed. We are going to be creating a website. It's in the process right now of putting all of our books on a bookcase. And when you see a book you want, you tap it open. And when you open it, it'll be a lesson plan of sorts. It'll be the lectures that we've done on that particular subject, articles of value, anything that we think that will round out your experience in learning about the topic of the book. Now, we didn't want to be a booksellers, that's for sure, but we have to get the information out. We know that there's so many spiritual seekers out there. And if you were like us when we began our spiritual journey, or really is there a beginning and when does it end? But at a moment in time when you think, oh, I'm on a spiritual journey, you are going to want to nourish your soul with deep spiritual material. In 1984, I had my experience, and I've talked about it before in previous videos. And when you're on a spiritual journey, if you're like us, you're going to be seeking for material to read to understand what you're going through. In 1984, when I had my experience of enlightenment, I went to every bookstore that was out there. There was no internet, so you had to go through the bookstores. You looked online to see if any teachers or gurus or town, and I did it all. When I look back, though, I can see that I was reaching for things that were luciferic, so that's why I didn't feel nourished. But one day I found Steiner. Oh, yes, and then I took everything I could get on Steiner and read all the time. Now, back in the days before the internet, Steiner was a little bit challenging to read because first you had to get the books translated from German into English. You had to find a good translation. And then the thing is that the subjects are all scattered throughout a number of lectures and books. So if you were interested, for example, on the topic of, let's say, how to become an angel, you would have to sort through a lot of different things to come up with maybe some clear direction. This is where Douglas comes in. Douglas spent his life becoming a Steiner scholar. It started for him, well, I don't know when it started, but I can just say one mark is when the Catholic Church hired you on as a priest and you traveled all around the world to find out as much as you could about anthroposophy and Waldorf for the Catholic Church. Now, in the end, they decided not to accept your they accepted your paper, but it's still on the shelf. Don't they have a big library down there in the basement of the Vatican? Okay, well, you'll probably find Douglas Gabriel down there. What I noticed when I was working with Douglas is that he is a special kind of translator. You know, you can take a book in German, you can translate it word by word into English, but you might not capture the essence of what's being said unless the translator, he himself, herself, is a deep anthroposophist. And that's what Douglas does for us. He has read all the books, he's done the research, he continues to do deep research even today. And then he is pulling up these books in single topics so that you don't have to sort through all of this and you can get it in one book. But you don't have to buy the book. And that was very important to us. You could just listen to the lectures. You could read the auxiliary material that we have. You don't have to buy the book, but you want to buy the book. Because as you know, when the internet goes down and when the digital world collapses, you're not going to be able to have anything unless you have a book on the shelf. So we encourage you to buy the book when you can afford it. If you can afford it, make sure to watch the videos to supplement your book, or don't. I mean, we have all kinds of ways for you to approach the material. Now, some people come back and they say, oh, but your books, they're sold on Amazon and, you know, this is not good. It's a globalist place. Well, yes, they are printed on Amazon, but each book comes with a sigil printed on it right here. And if you look, all of them do. The sigil then is printed at Amazon, so all that detrimental energy is just transmuted into the beneficial energies that you expect as it travels to you, and it winds up into your home and you begin to read. The other thing is that you can take this book and leave it like this, you know, at your bedside, and that sigil is going to continue to put out energy. So it's almost like you don't even have to read the book to get the good vibes, but you'll want to read the book. Now, let me tell you about this book and why it's so special, The Eighth Sphere. This is, you see how thin this book is? Let me see if I can turn it around here. It's not a thick book at all, very thin book. And we wanted it that way. We have some large books, 300 pages, but we also wanted to have some small booklets for onboarding people that are just new to the subject. They don't want to commit a lot, but they want to read a little something. So that's what these booklets do. And the first booklet is the Eighth Sphere. I asked Douglas to put this together because a lot of people are asking, as we go through the big shift, this from the Kali Yuga to the Sada Yuga, however you want, this change, we want you to have a quick reference book so that you can follow along and find out. Because the question people ask is, what happens to all the people who are so evil, the criminals? Douglas, you wrote this book, The Eighth Sphere. And what I would like to know, and for you to tell everybody, is why could this book be the most important spiritual book you have in your library?
Well, that's a great introduction. Thank you so much, Tyla. If you don't know, Tyla's our producer, director, and the leader of our group. And you can't, as a true esotericist, answer just any question you want. You have to answer true and sincere questions. And so her questions have actually led all of our work. And so this question now of creating a book on the Eighth Sphere is very pertinent. It's very important because why? It's one of the hottest topics that I've ever had to address as a Waldorf teacher and as a teacher of anthroposophy for 40 years. The number one question people really have is there a permanent hell? And of course, you know, here we're trying to teach spiritual development. And the first question people have is, am I really going to go to hell? And what's hell like? And is it permanent? Is it eternal? So on and so forth. This is a huge question. And we had put in the different books little sections on the Eighth Sphere because it's so important. And so you see some remarks in a variety of the books. We have about 23 books at this point. We'll have many more later. But the point is that even then, as Tyler just said, you want a topic of the Eighth Sphere, well, then you'd have to go and look at everything of Rudolf Steiner's, 6,000 lectures and 20 books, and then extract that, put it into a sensible order, create commentary and support material, and do what Steiner said, align it with the thinking of the times, as well as all past theoretical considerations of eschatology, the end times. And so that's what the Eighth Sphere is about. It's really about the future. It's about evil. It's about whether there's a permanent hell. And essentially, it tries to answer the question of where are we going? Now, we put in the book on the apocalypse, Surviving the Apocalypse, Building Your Own Ark. In that book, it describes really where we are headed. And in that book, it's very important to understand the characters that are involved in describing the Eighth Sphere. The Eighth Sphere, one could say, is hell. Well, or they could say that it's the bottomless pit, or they could say from the book of Revelations, or they could say from the book of Revelations that it's the fiery lake or the second death. But all of those things must be explained and put in proper perspective if you're going to understand this. And so I will attempt to do so. And because it is such an important question, it has arisen on the internet by a variety of people who are in a variety of different conditions of understanding anthroposophy. For instance, if you've studied anthroposophy for 10 years, that's nice. That's a beginning. As they say with any art, you need to practice for 10,000 hours before you actually take the first step. Same thing with anthroposophy. If you don't study, they used to say, once you've studied and read, even if you read it and didn't understand it, 125 books of Rudolf Steiner, you begin to think his way so that when you're reading other lecture series, that you can then put things in perspective. And that's basically true. But unfortunately, some of the loudest voices on the internet are people who've had a modicum, a tiny exposure to Rudolf Steiner. And then they start talking about things like the Eighth Sphere or meditation, prayer, or any variety of deep questions of cosmological nature. And where do they end up? In the shallow end of the pool. So today we're going to discuss the Eighth Sphere, but it does take some perspective. So I will try to create that perspective for you. Essentially, when you're talking about hell, let's just also indicate that hell is something like the eighth sphere. Is it the eighth sphere? No, it is not. Is Hades the eighth sphere? No, it is not. Is the lake of fire the eighth sphere and the second death a relationship to the eighth sphere? Yes, it is. Now, you're only going to find that referred to in the book of Revelation of St. John the Divine, which we also have explanations of that in the book on Apocalypse. What that was John, St. John, who Christ said that he gave over his mother, or the being of Mary Sophia, into the care of John the Divine, who was under the cross at the crucifixion. And so in that book of Revelation, St. John demonstrates that he had gone through the previous initiatory circumstances that a Hebrew would go through, because he's making all the same references that Daniel makes in the Old Testament, that's in Ezekiel, that in all the different relationships to entering into the divine spiritual world. In other words, rising up to what is sometimes called the third heaven, the seventh heaven, the ninth heaven, to meet with the 24 elders or the spirits of the thrones, and to have communion with them, to basically sit down and sup with them, sit down and basically get nourished and participate in a mutual nourishment between the being who has arisen into this realm and the beings who are there. This apocalypse means uncovering of the soul. So you need to uncover your soul to find out the spirit that's behind it. Now, most of our spirits are coming to us from the future. They've been preserved in the spiritual world, and you can, if you are an initiate and you've gone through the stages of preparation, enlightenment, and initiation, you can begin to receive these messages of your higher selves at this moment in time through moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition. And that's what John did. John received moral intuitions, which basically are beyond time and space. And in fact, technically, they're beyond even consciousness, but beyond time and space. So imagine when John was on the island of Patmos, and I've been there myself, and in the cave where he supposedly got the inspiration for the book of Revelation, I've been in that cave, and there was a place that they say was his bed, and I've laid in that bed, or laying in the bed, whichever it is. But I laid down in this bed, and as I was there, just like when I was in the Great Pyramid, in the sepulcher of the Great Pyramid, an explosion happened. I thought there was an earthquake, and I rose up, and strangely enough, this bed right above it's in a cave, and so you hit your head in the cave wall, and strangely enough, there is a crack right above this bed. And so when I laid down in it, because no one was around, I had this experience, and I rose up and I hit my head on this crack in the wall, in the cave wall, and basically saw stars, as you do when you bump your head. But anyway, I was chasing the question of, is this literally true? Is what John said literally true? Well, you have to be very careful with that. That's the reason that it takes many, many years, decades of research and study of the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, again and again and again, realizing that it is out of space, it is out of time. It is not talking about sequential orders of things. It is not talking just about the seven churches and what are the vials and what are the wraths and what are the trumpets. These things are mystery initiation wisdom. In the ancient time, the mystery schools, especially the Hebrew schools, taught the prophets what it was to rise into the spiritual world. In other words, to have an apocalypse, to have a revelation. And once they had that, it's a tough job, because if the prophet made one single wrong prophecy, the reward was death. So you can imagine that these traditions were very exact about they were explicit in their descriptions of what these beings were, but they used symbols that were familiar to them. And basically, as Rudolf Steiner has pointed out, that what Christ said, he clearly said this, that he taught parables to the common people, but his disciples, his apostles, he taught mystery wisdom. And so he spoke in the same language of mystery wisdom. And so when you hear Matthew and Mark referring to hell, they're referring to the mystery tradition that Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, who became Christ for 3 years, was speaking out of. And so it was a familiar territory. So when they said the number of man is 666, it is not anything like any interpretation I've ever heard, except those of theosophy and anthroposophy, spiritual science, and particularly Rudolf Steiner, because he describes then what is known as the golden chain. This golden chain is basically what happens when you have an apocalypse, an unveiling of the soul, and you see time, all the past, the present, and the future. Because, and this is the most difficult concept I'm going to present to you today, because it's the concept that you can't understand Revelations without. Time is eternal, but eternal has a limit. Beyond time, beyond what is called in the Bible eternal or forever, is the condition of the description of Christ at the beginning of the book of Revelation. I am the past, the present, and the future. And he says he is the Alpha and the Omega. In other words, he's the entire alphabet of creation, but things existed before that and they exist after that. So when the book of Revelation says heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away, that is the real mystery that we're dealing with here. The word is the creative word of Christ, who is a member of the Holy Trinity, which is one God in three parts, past, present, and future. So what John is telling us in the book of Revelation is beyond space and time, and particularly when he names things, they are symbols. It's like a dream. Everything in your dream is you, unless you're having a precognitive dream. So when you wake up, you shouldn't imagine that the person you saw in the dream, that something happened with them overnight. No, that person is a symbol. They're a representation. They are an image. They are basically a key, a piece to the puzzle. And that's what you need to do when you look at the book of Revelation. And when it says hell, remember that the book of Revelation says that hell and Hades, which was Gehenna, that was the Greek name for the Hebrew hell, which was called Gehenna. In the Mesopotamian, it was called Ur. Plato called it Ur. There's 1,000 names for this underworld that is not the second death. It is not the fiery lake of fire and brimstone that Satan, the witness before the beast, the beast, the Antichrist, and Satan will all be thrown into this fiery lake, this second death, and those who are non-believers in Christ. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you have to believe what some religion teaches about Jesus of Nazareth, who they called Christ? No. Christ is in you. It's your higher self. So if you have not acknowledged your higher self, because that's what the book of Revelation says, it says that, and this is really strange because people don't seem to read the book as a victory story. They read it as a scary nightmare. And they try to find ways to overlay those symbolic images on our time and say that we're in the time of the seventh trumpet. We're at the end. We're at the war of all against all. No, we're not. We could be, but then every single person is when they die. So the images in the book of Revelation will happen to you when you die. Now, the question will be, are you going to be thrown in the fiery lake of that is the second death when you die? No. When you die, you go to a realm which Dante described as, of course, hell, paradise, purgatory, and paradise. The Catholic Church, of course, added this whole concept of purgatory, a place you go to work off your sins, where the fire is not quite so burning and the smell of brimstone and sulfur are not quite so overwhelming. But you go to this realm after you die. It's called Kamaloka from the Hindu scriptures. It's called Bardo from the Tibetan teachings. And when you enter the realm of Bardo, you go through intermediate states. You go through a process of basically judging yourself, because remember, that's what happens repeatedly in the book of Revelation. There are multiple judgments. The first judgment is, as told in the letters to the churches, it tells you what you should be working on in your different bodies. That's what those letters are referring to. They're referring to periods of time when we, as human beings and as humanity collectively, are developing our physical, etheric, astral bodies, our 3 parts of our soul and the 3 parts of our spirit. There's these descriptions that are personal. They are for you. They are for you to understand. So as you read those, you can find which of those churches you exist. Now, you can also, through the wisdom of spiritual science, figure out which of those churches are describing the different epochs of cultural periods that are ruled by archangels and archai. Archai are time spirits. Archangels are what are called regents of the zeitgeist, or the time spirits, or the spirit of the time, or the leader of the time. As an archangel rises up into the realm of the archai, they lead for about 360 years or so, and they carry a different flavor, a different planetary influence and correspondence that create certain general characteristics that happen over and over on a repetitive cycle, but always at a higher level. So when you enter into the question of time in the book of Revelation, and you ask yourself the question, am I going to go to hell, or Gehenna, or Sheol, as the Hebrews called it, or the bosom of Abraham? Am I going to go to purgatory? And then there, what am I waiting for anyway? Well, as we know, with the story of the mystery of Golgotha, Christ's birth, death, descent to hell, and resurrection, we are told that Christ went to hell in the days between his death and his resurrection. And why did he do that? And why did the Hebrew people believe that when they died, they didn't go to a permanent hell? Because there was no second judgment. There's a judgment after you die, but the big question is what will happen after many incarnations that are aligned with the earth. Well, Revelation says the earth and heaven will pass away, but my word will never pass away. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about that in the realm of time, the earth itself will pass away. And time on earth would be considered the time that would be from beginning to the end of the earth as the only time that space is considered the way it is by human beings. Time is considered with the limitations of human perception and a linear understanding of it. Well, time is not linear, and space is not confined. And space is not what we think it is. As a matter of fact, everything beyond our own solar system is incomprehensible to the human mind, and it's all speculation. So when you die, the question is, will you go to the place that the book of Revelation says that Christ appears on a cloud with a sickle, and he gathers his harvest? This is death. Because if you know that Christ is in you, you know you're eternal. And the injunction in the book of Revelation is to preach the eternal gospel and sing the new song of Christ. That's our job. But we are harvested early on for those who know that even the first death they will not face, and absolutely they will not face the second death, because they are already conscious, they already know who Christ is. And that's the whole issue. That's from beginning to end. The book of Revelation is saying, I'm revealing to you who Christ is in the big picture, in the whole picture of the 7 golden spheres, or the golden chain, or these 7 spheres of creation. The earth is the 4th of those spheres, but there were 3 spheres before, and there will be 3 spheres after. And that's where the concept of the eighth sphere comes in. On earth, as humans, we do face death, and that's the first death. But it's, in fact, completely redeemed if you have absorbed the resurrection body of Christ. You do not face death. That's what the Revelation says again and again and again. You will not face death. Now, those who are not harvested by Christ early on in the book of Revelation have to later face 1,000 years of tribulation after the whore of Babylon comes, after the beast from the earth comes, the beast from the water, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, after the Antichrist comes, after the witness before the beast with 2 horns, and all those who follow them. Those all come. And that's even before the 1,000 years. That's the years of tribulation. And then we hear that the word of Christ is able to cast Satan, that, as it's called in Revelation, the father of lies, or the great beast, or the dragon, cast him into a bottomless pit and chain him there until he is released. So have we reached a point when Satan has been bound? Has anyone noticed in their life that Satan's been bound? No, of course Satan hasn't been bound. And that would only be for those who have been already harvested, because you're harvested before Satan is bound, and before tribulation, Satan is bound, and before the judgment, and before the casting into the fiery lake of brimstone and sulfur, the second death. So when you die, when a Hebrew died in the old times, they said, well, they didn't have a chance to meet the Messiah. And the Messiah is the redemption of all of incarnations, the whole point of incarnating. And so what happened? They're waiting in the bosom of Abraham. Now, if you were a bad person in the Hebrew tradition, and that tradition came from Mesopotamia, it came from Persia, it came from India, it came from Greece. These traditions are ubiquitous through every single religion or mythology that I know. There's a description of this underworld, Tartarus, Hades, the land that heroes are able to go into and come out. Psyche, the great heroine of the Greek story of Psyche and Eros, she went to the underworld and she came back. As long as you don't eat the food and drink the drink of the underworld, you're able to go there and return. So in other words, that certainly isn't a total death. Neither is it the second death. Mercury went there, Aeneas went there, Hercules went there, Orpheus went into those realms and came out. And in almost every really developed tradition, fully developed tradition, you will find that some hero goes into that realm and comes back. Now, what do we have as Christianity? Christ went into that realm. So everyone before Christ was incarnated, there are many myths that describe Christ coming to the earth, and that Christ will die for the redemption of humanity, and that Christ is a solar deity that is the creator of our own I am, this image and likeness of God that each of us has, the I am in our heart, in our consciousness, that Christ is that perfect example for us to follow. But after Christ died, his blood went into the earth, which then started to redeem the earth and take it out of entropy and turn it into ectropy, out of gravity and death and coldness into the fiery warmth of levity that is the mystery of resurrection, of Christ's resurrection body, which is now in the etheric realm around the earth. So the earth is renewing itself and becoming, in fact, not just a planet, but growing into becoming a star, a radiant star that can then give out warmth, light, sound, and life, just like the sun does. So we have been given the chance, if you were a pre-Christian, and we all were at some point or another, in one incarnation or another, that we were held in Sheol, or the bosom of Abraham, or the underworld, whatever you want to call it. And then Christ came to that realm so that every single soul before the mystery of Golgotha would have an opportunity to experience Christ and say, oh, that is my divine template that I wish to emulate, that I wish to become. And then you begin to say, not I, but Christ in me. And in the far future, that's what we'll be saying. And the people who have been redeemed and given the white robes and teach the eternal gospel and sing the eternal song, or the song of Christ, the song of the Lion of Judah, as it's described in the book of Revelation, those people know that they're eternal because they know that they have Christ in them. So we have this opportunity by studying the book of Revelation to find out about what ancient Hindu, Persian, Mesopotamian, Egyptian authors, who were divinely inspired in many cases, were talking about when they talked about what Steiner calls the eighth sphere. Now, in the book, The Eighth Sphere, right in the beginning, we put a chart. And this chart shows 7 major spheres, starting at the top, going to the bottom point, and then going back up. Well, you'll notice at the bottom sphere, the 4th sphere in this sequence, let's see if I can point out it, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's this other sphere. Now, mind you, we already know there's a moon around the earth, right? But this says there's an 8th sphere, right? So what does that mean? Now, this is where it gets complicated. The 8th sphere interpenetrates normal material world. Steiner calls them 7 dimensions. These 7 spheres, or this golden chain of globes and spheres, are the different incarnations of the earth. Humans didn't come into this chain until the 4th sphere. Before that, we were living through the first 3 spheres, which created minerals, plants, animals, and in the 4th sphere, humans. So there is a part in every one of us that has the mineral, plant, animal perfections that arose during those 3 previous spheres. But in the 4th sphere, we recapitulate all of that, and it comes in a new form. Now, the future spheres are, in fact, redemptions of those other spheres. For instance, we are in the 3rd dimension. Steiner points out that there will be a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th dimension, and that they interpenetrate us. So concurrently active right now are not only the whole 9 hierarchical spiritual ranks working through our body and in the physical world as they donate aspects to us, kind of like a shadow. They don't really come into this realm. Those beings are not human now. They are above us: angels, archangels, archai, Kyrieutetes, dynamis, exousiai, thrones, cherubim, seraphim, and then above them, the Holy Trinity. Those 9 hierarchical beings are manifesting now, but they gave donations in the past. So in the 1st sphere, warmth was given. Well, by the time it reached the earth that we have now, that warmth became minerals. In the 2nd sphere, these are divine hierarchical beings who, in some cases, came to their furthest down on the ranks of the spiritual hierarchies as they could come. They can't come into the realm of the human, because in the realm of the human, there's death. We think there's death. Well, there is a death because we have freedom, and we can choose to either go into the 2nd death, or even 1st death and 2nd death in the fiery lake. And that's a choice. Each of us has that choice. But as these beings from the past donated in the 1st sphere, the minerals, in the 2nd sphere, the plants, in the 3rd sphere, the animals, there was, during the 3rd sphere, a time when something happened which is inexplicable. And as far as I can tell, there's no mythology, there's no religion that actually explains this. And Rudolf Steiner does the best that I can find. But he says that during that time, angels, during the 3rd sphere, were in their human form. Previously, the archangels were in their human form, which is not a human, just their furthest down into physical incarnation that they can come. In the 2nd sphere, it was the archangels. In the 1st sphere, it was the archai. The archai are beings of time. The archangels are beings of light. Angels are beings of fluidity. And then humans are this 10th hierarchy that is below the other 9 hierarchies. But we're going to rise up into those hierarchical ranks in the future. So when these beings went through their humanness, even higher beings had to create an atmosphere for them to do that in. Just like now, we have all 9 hierarchies creating the earth realm that we don't even see them anymore because they can't come down here, but we can see what they have donated. This donation of material substance, whether it be mineral, plant, or animal, is there for us to bump up against, to us to push against. It is, in fact, a necessary evil. And in the past, it wasn't evil. It was a donation. It was a sacrifice. It was a renunciation. It was a resignation of the higher spiritual beings to, in fact, hold back in time and space an element that would then become materially condensed. This happened because of the war in heaven. We hear the war in heaven described as Lucifer, who was the highest angel, fell into the realm of the material world. Well, this is what is being described in this golden chain of spheres. It's a falling of hierarchical beings into the material realm as a donation for humans to bump up against to create their own freedom out of love. But we have also the freedom to deny that God exists. We have the freedom to deny that all those hierarchical ranks exist. We have the freedom to deny that there's such a thing as a realm without space, a realm without time, a realm that is beyond human consciousness. We have that hubris. We have that pride. That's the Luciferic pride. But during the 3rd sphere of the moon, something happened. Now, angels lived as divine images, pictures, 2-dimensional pictures, always flowing in from the periphery into a point. And this can be described and is described by Rudolf Steiner in the book on the 4th dimension, but you can get it in our book called The Eternal Ethers, A Theory of Everything, which is on Amazon. And in there, I have basically condensed the best descriptions of these things, particularly from Steiner and others, so that you can understand them to some degree with human consciousness and cognize these things as in terms of putting them in somewhat of a divine plan is what it's called. It's called a Manvantara. The 7 spheres all together, and the pralayas, the rest periods in between them where everything goes into chaos and then comes out again in a new form. There's a pralaya between each of the 7 spheres. If you look at all of the 7 spheres together, that's called a Manvantara or a Mahaparamanvantara, depending upon how you want to look at it. But there's a name for it. It's called the divine plan. Well, the divine plan needed hierarchical beings to resist it to create matter. And it is matter that is the delusion, the illusion that you are not eternal. But if you can overcome that, if you can see through it and see the workings of the spiritual beings falling, shattering into this realm, then you can, in fact, transcend it. You can be resurrected into a realm of the eternal. And this is the great distinction. So in the first 3 spheres, hierarchical beings made donations for us, and they are still here as elemental beings, as elemental as elements, as elemental beings, as elemental forces, formative forces, as the ethers. All of these things are here for us to work with, and it's extraordinarily complicated to realize how time, from a human perspective, can't understand that we have what's called heterochrony. We have beings from the ancient past active in us now. And when we take over for what they have given us as donations, we can then become free and develop and ascend into the future 3 spheres. Now, the distinction has to be made there because during the 3rd sphere, these images started to manifest as something quite physical because it was a realm of fluidity. Everything flows. For instance, when you're going to sleep at night, if you can watch it very carefully, when right before you go to sleep, you will see an ocean of images coming from all directions that aren't yours. Now, when you surrender into sleep, they for sure aren't your images, and you can't control them when you're in your dreams. So that is a realm that the angels live in. And that is when the eighth sphere started to be created. So even though there's no eighth sphere during the third sphere on that chart, and the eighth sphere is shown on the fourth cycle, or the fourth sphere of Earth, where we humans come to our awakening, what we have really is the remnants of the third sphere coming into the fourth sphere that created what we now know as the possibility for evil. Because some of the beings who did not donate their substance, but they became laggard beings. They decided out of their own freedom, well, out of their own humanness, to have freedom and to fall back in time because they were advanced beings. So they could, in fact, rule over lesser beings. This is the pride of Lucifer. This is what started the eighth sphere. Now, the eighth sphere is not separate from the earth. It totally interpenetrates the earth, but most people that I hear speak of it on the internet will tell you that the eighth sphere is the moon. No, it is not. Now, let's look back on those beings who fell a long time ago, the fall from heaven, casting out from heaven into the earth realm. During the first sphere, there were beings called asuras. They are beings who try to eat human willpower, and that's their job, is to eat your willpower and to try to steal everything you do so that you can become an automaton that can be controlled by material substance. That would be computers, your cell phone, the television, the internet. All these things are material beings that really don't exist in this realm, and they steal your warmth. All these devices I'm talking about, machine devices, are cold. You can't exist in them. Enter into your computer and you'd get shocked by the electricity, wouldn't you? But what is electricity? Electricity are fallen angels. So the asuras are all fallen beings, and all ranks are called Luciferic hosts because they fell. They had the fall of Lucifer. So the asuras are in your willpower. Now, they don't have complete control of your willpower because humans don't control their willpower. I mean, that's really sad to hear, but most people can't even change their food, their diet. They can't stop their smoking. They can't stop drinking. They can't stop their emotional addictions. They don't control their willpower. These beings come in, and they're very nasty beings. They take over the willpower, and if they can get control of that, they get control of you and your soul and your spirit. In the second sphere, the fallen beings are called Ahrimanic beings, according to Rudolf Steiner, the Persians, and other spiritual scientists. These Ahrimanic beings are in your feeling, and they want to turn your feeling into cold-heartedness, to get you to turn towards fear and hatred. Asuras love hatred also, but the Ahriman loves lies, and we live in a time of complete lies. We are swimming in an ocean of lies, of untruthfulness. And it's the karma of untruthfulness that creates the necessity for the human ego to rise up, get control of itself, get control of its will and its feelings and its thinking, because they're all three different, and turn them into higher capacities. So Ahriman, who is actually, according to Rudolf Steiner, is literally physically incarnated in the world now, and since 1840 or so, has basically been the materialistic ruler of this realm. And it gets worse all the time for those people who are turning their hearts cold and not having the fiery warmth of Christ in their heart. And then in the third sphere, the angels, some of them fell, and they are called Luciferic beings. Now, this is where a lot of confusion comes in. Lucifer is a being. Lucifer incarnated in China in the 2nd millennium BC. Ahriman incarnated in North America in the 2nd millennium AD as a counterpole to Christ's incarnation at the mystery of Golgotha. So Christ is in the middle. Lucifer is on one side, the past, and Ahriman's on the other side, the future. and we are being torn between them. Now, the Asuras have yet to come fully into power because they are controlled by the Antichrist. Well, Christ worked from the realm of the Elohim, the solar logos of the sun, which controls the planets also. And so Christ has his opponent on the sun, and his name is Sorat or Soroth, or that is the real Antichrist. There are many Antichrists, the Bible tells us, but that Antichrist is still on the sun. He would like to steal your I am and make sure that it goes into the fiery lake during the second death, along with him and his cohorts, the dragons, the beasts, the Antichrist, Satan, Ahriman, will all wish to draw you through your ego, by getting control of your ego, into the eighth sphere. Now, it doesn't mean that while you're alive, you're going to be living in a different place called the eighth sphere. It doesn't mean that the Asuras who do work from the realm of the moon are going to come and take over your body without you knowing it. No such thing. There's no such thing as a possession against a human being's willpower. The human willpower, the I am, is inviolable. It cannot be conquered. It cannot be destroyed. It is eternal. The only thing that can destroy it is if humans go backwards from being humans into animals, into plants, even into the mineral realm. And if you are unfortunate enough that you keep choosing to go on the path of perdition into this hell realm, but it's beyond a hell realm when it reaches what's called the sixth sphere. We'll talk about that in a minute. But during the sixth sphere is when the lake, the fiery lake, happens, and basically evil is more or less ended in that realm that is called the future Jupiter, future Venus, which is the sixth sphere. But basically, what happens here is that if you get your I am stolen by Arsuric beings in your will, Ahrimanic beings in your feeling, and Luciferic beings in your thinking, and you stay in there and you allow them again and again, you ask them to come into you, you ask them to take over your willpower, your feelings, your thinking, you're not going to refine your will, your feeling, and your thinking into the higher forces that Steiner calls moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition, which are the realms, the three future spheres. The realm where we become angels in the fifth sphere, we become archangels in the sixth sphere, we become archai in the seventh sphere. So our destiny is to get out of space and time, and even what we know as human consciousness, and rise into our higher nature, which has always been preserved for us on the sun. But Sorat wishes to come to the earth after his Asuras and Ahriman and Lucifer have enticed us into these, we can call them hell realms, but they're also subnatural realms of overmaterialization, hypermaterialization, where we believe that we can be immortal on the earth. And what do all the billionaires want? To be immortal on the earth. They're afraid to face death because they don't know that they're eternal. So they try to get enough money and enough machines that they can then live in the machine, take their consciousness supposedly from their brain, which will never happen, by the way, put it into a machine, and that they would live there with this fake immortality. This is the Sorathic fake immortality. So we as humans in the earth realm look forward to what we're told is called heaven. Well, that heaven, Rudolf Steiner and spiritual scientists call future Jupiter. So if you don't understand your Christ and self before the war of all against all, which at the end of the seven, there's seven spheres, 7 cycles inside of those spheres, 7 cycles inside of those. So when you reach the end of that for the earth, what will happen? As we move into future Jupiter, everything first goes into pralaya, goes into total chaos, like a chrysalis and turning from a caterpillar to a butterfly. We turn into angels. But unfortunately, those who decided to become more animal than human, or even drop down into the realm of plants, or even into the realm of minerals, will become subhumans. So humans, some will become angels, some will become black magicians. Those black magicians are some of these beings who fell from grace in previous times, in previous spheres. And then there will be this eighth sphere. And the eighth sphere, Steiner says, is a dark realm of mud where humans will, in fact, be like slugs. And so in future Jupiter, which we call heaven, we see that we are angels, but we forget that as angels, we're going to have to help the subhumans who are perhaps fallen into the animal, plant, or mineral realm. That's going to be our job. And we'll be fighting against evil, evil black magicians of even higher rank than a human being. And then that will go into the next sphere. And in the next sphere is when it reaches that's the sixth sphere, and it reaches the sixth cycle of the sixth inner cycle. That is 666. And that is when the final judgment comes. And when the final judgment comes, as we've said, Satan and all of his cohort will be thrown into the fiery lake. Does that mean it's the end of them and the end of their existence? No, it does not. But they can't go with us to the sun, because in the seventh sphere of Vulcan, we will actually be united with the sun again, as we were to begin with in the first sphere. So what happens to those beings? They are not totally annihilated. There is no permanent hell. You're given chances all along the way to either fall or rise. That is a personal decision for a human who has freedom. And even the hierarchies, when they had human freedom, they had to make the decision, and that's why some of them have fallen and are in this realm. These are called the Avicii men, or the Avicii, and they are in fact people who are possessed by demons in our time, who have chosen to be possessed by demons. And so in the sixth sphere, they will meet a judgment, and they will be cast into this realm. And then for a while, they'll be in great darkness. Eternity, what is called eternity or foreverness, will end. And endurance or duration then becomes the sequence of time, which is actually pervasive and goes in both directions at one time. And then on Vulcan, they have to wait. And then they return in the seventh dimension to starting all over again. We humans will be archive beings, will be beings of time, beings of fire spirits by then. But those other beings, the human beings who've fallen back, they will become nature spirits. They will become elemental beings, and they will have to start all over again on the golden chain of the spheres. So they are not ever thrown out. Nothing is wasted in creation, and there is no such thing as permanent hell, but it sure looks like it for those who are trapped in time and in a realm that burns them. But what burns you? Your unfinished, your unrequited, your unresolved desires are a fiery nature that burn you even now. So when people talk about the eighth sphere, it's happening right now. And you can look in someone's face and see if they're in hell, if they're in this fiery realm. And if they decide to continue in that realm, they then become chosen members of the realm of the eighth sphere.